Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Eileen Jang Lynch, Director of Curatorial Programs. We're thrilled to have you join us this evening at the Bronx Museum. And so the Bronx Museum, over the last 5 decades, has been at the forefront of cultural diversity and accessibility, and that's reflected throughout all of our programming, all our exhibitions, our public programs, our education programs, and our permanent collection. And we are always free for everyone, and so again, we thank you so much for joining us. And we're thrilled tonight to have this discussion with FUTURA, Crash and DAZE, moderated by MARE, on the occasion of FUTURA's retrospective that's downstairs in the gallery. The exhibition showcases also 5 decades worth of work, collaborations, and products showing his career path, his trajectory from early graffiti styles to contemporary abstraction, and also bridging the various disciplines of street art, fine art, which I'll dive into a little bit, more in a little bit, music, and fashion. And so for tonight's discussion, Crash, DAZE, FUTURA, and MARE have known each other for a very long time, over 40 years. And so they will discuss and unpack this history, but also the categorization of the terms that I mentioned earlier, so street art, high art, fine art, which is a really important conversation to have and very timely. And I also want to thank, for tonight's program, all of my colleagues here at the museum, our public program consultants, Diversity in Action, who's a sponsor of tonight's event, really appreciate it, and Company Agenda, and of course, Iconoclast, and all of our esteemed panelists tonight. And so I want to turn it over to MARE, artist, educator, scholar, technologist, who just debuted a project at Wynwood Walls. Also, DAZE just had a project there in Miami as well, and FUTURA has a large-scale mural also in Miami at Wynwood. So thank you all again, and MARE, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Again, I'd like to reiterate her gratitude for the people that make this happen for the Bronx and have made this happen for the Bronx for many years. It's important to start acknowledging the culture and the talent that is in this borough and to give it a dignified home. That said, like she mentioned, I've known these men for a long time. Our genesis story is very diverse. But I wanted to start this conversation with some background about where we are in the Bronx and what this was. As I mentioned up here, I say it was a crime scene, kids turning a crime scene into a garden, kids at play with something to say. And so this photograph, this infamous photograph, gives you the backdrop of what many of us were experiencing throughout the 5 boroughs, more or less, right? And from that, something very unique was happening. And in this image by Marty Cooper, it gives you an idea of children at play. And one thing you do notice at play, that there is graffiti in the background of kids playing. And of course, there was this other movement that was happening on the trains, which was the early graffiti movement. And we all start somewhere for a reason. And so I want to ask you guys about the genesis of this play for you, right? And finding a name and identity. Lenny, you're FUTURA, right? That's such a compelling name. You've chosen a name that aimed towards the future. So as a kid, what were you aiming towards? Why that name?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Yeah, that's a great question, obviously, but it makes me think of, ad agencies and advertising, and identity and what is identity and how do you come up with it. I guess I got lucky. Yeah, FUTURA indicated the future in 1970 when I envisioned the FUTURA 2000 identity. There was a typeface, there was a car, there was a blender, there was a sewing machine. There were Futuras out there, but there was certainly not a FUTURA graffiti writer in the New York City subway story or graffiti archive. So I think I got lucky, but I was a only child, kind of dreamer. I had an imagination, and you know, it's remarkable where that actually took me. But back then, I was simply, like I think we all were, once we get involved in this story, creating an identity for ourselves, a tag, a name that we write, you know, develop at some point from a simple tag to an incredible, you know, wild style burner masterpiece.
Right. So this is important too because the signature was everything, was stylized. And up here we see early Tacky 183, how simple that is. And below, Stay High, and of course Faze, who's a master stylist. And so were you having aspirations for being better at designing your name?
I mean, I'm fortunate to arrive in that kind of first 1.0 generation of writers. So I saw, I mean, I was very much inspired by Stay High's tag, Phase 2 style. We could say, not to disrespect anyone, you know, a lot of writers didn't really have style. They had identity. But yeah, I wanted to come up with something that was unique, you know, original to myself, and my elaborate first generation FUTURA 2000 tag was pretty sci-fi for its time.
And Crash, you chose a name that, again, is actually brilliant when I think about it, in its application and impact, right? Was Crash your first tag? Were you writing Crash and identifying as Crash for a reason, or was it something stylistic?
Well, it came from high school. And it's funny because it also touches on technology, because I went to a high school that was teaching me computer programming. And when I graduated, it's funny, when I graduated, that's when they brought in the personal computers. But before, it was a computer that filled like this whole room. And I happened to crash the system. They were teaching us how to turn on the computer and put in the data system, the data disk in. I put it in the wrong way and it crashed. And kids being kids in school, that's how it stuck. But it was, you know, it was also, came out of the tech era, so it's kind of cool.
In DAZE, coming to you about name and identity, what were the cues that were kind of informing you that you had to be DAZE?
Well, I think in choosing one's name in the very beginning, it's a really important decision because you're laying the groundwork for the future. So I went through a few sort of instantly forgettable names, and I started thinking about, okay, what could I draw best? What letters started to come more naturally to me in designing a name? So I started to think about that, which is kind of a formal decision within itself. So I kind of came up with the name DAZE, and then, I mean, even before I got to that point, I think your choice of letters should have a certain rhythm. They should kind of coexist in a way that comes natural. And that is really just an intuitive decision. And you know, you're, again, which has already been touched upon, you're establishing your identity. So you want to choose something that isn't already in circulation and being used, and that name wasn't taken.
You bring up a good point, because as we look at the Futura tag, the very early Futura tags and the more modern Futura tag, what a leap, right? What an evolution in his signature. And here with Crash, and again, we're going to touch on style writing really quick, right? Because the name becomes something abstract, right? Something more sophisticated. And John, you were very, very good as a style writer. You doing these beautiful masterpieces, and some of these you've painted with my brother Kel. What was it about going beyond the signature into this form of style writing that people should know?
Well, when it comes to style, you know, that individualistic, whatever you want to call it, the letter, Ram touched on that, you know, the way you took the letter and you made it your own. It's an extension of your signature. And the cooler the signature, obviously, the cooler you are. So the pieces had to reflect that. And, you know, we just went back and forth with this. It was a challenge because everyone tries to outdo each other style-wise. And, you know, this was just an outcome of that. That's what it was.
And so here we have a DAZE wild style piece. And what's interesting about this, there are two things that stand out to me. Of course, the graffiti letters, but that the graffiti letters are kind of trying to push off the train, right, to come at people, right? There's a certain illusion of depth, which was really, really interesting about style writing. But also, I think where we see you and your interest in illustration and character development. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was I went to the High School of Art and Design, as you did as well, and my first artistic aspirations were actually to become a comic book artist. So, you know, even though I went to an art high school, really my art education came from comic books. And I learned how to kind of develop my own characters, and, you know, I learned a lot about perspective and anatomy and, you know, composition, all that from.
Who were some of your influences?
Some of my influences in comics were Jack Kirby, Neil Adams, Bernie Wrightson. Those are kind of more mainstream names, but also a lot of underground comics, and Mad Magazine was a big influence on me. So I looked at a lot of those things and learned a lot, and whenever I did a car, I tried to incorporate my own characters rather than to use already recognizable characters that were in circulation. That kind of meant a lot to me, and it was usually a kind of spontaneous decision. The piece that's on view now was something I didn't have an outline for. I didn't have an outline for the style or the character. And actually it harkens back to something Phase 2 told me. We were really good friends, and, you know, he'd look at a lot of my stuff, and we got into this conversation about bringing outlines, you know, on these various missions, and he told me, you know, if you can make it up on paper, you know, you can make it up on the train. Why not? You know, you can just be spontaneous like that. You know, just use that vehicle as an element of spontaneity. So that's what I did.
So on the trains, right? So now you're seeing a formula, a blueprint of lettering and painting with a very limited paint palette, let's just say. And that's important to remember in this conversation, limitations, but exceeding limitations, and that's what all these guys have managed to do. But there was a real paradigm shift with you, Lenny, and it was the brake hoe car. You can't ignore the impact and the ripple effect to this day of the brake hoe car. No letters, no style, just painting, just pure painting. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, wow. Do we have the fashion motor piece?
We're getting there.
We're going to get there, okay.
Because that was first, but...
Yeah, so the remarkable thing, guys, and once again, you know, it's awesome you guys brought your umbrellas. It's not an amazing evening, but you're out here for us. We appreciate it. Myself and Crash and DAZE and even MARE, we all met 44 years ago in the summer of 1980. And at that moment when we met, everyone was out writing graffiti, illegally, if you will, and we were a part of this group that was kind of organizing and making works on canvas. And that's when I got to meet everyone, actually, and that was a wonderful summer. Subsequent to that event, Crash was having an idea about organizing a graffiti show called GAS. Graffiti, I mean, everything is an acronym, right? So Graffiti Art Success, which actually in 1980 for a gallery in the Bronx, it was called Fashion Moda on 3rd Avenue, was kind of aspirational, right? I mean, yeah. So prior to the break train, guys, I had never even really made a painting yet, if you will, on any medium. And this, I would say, I was thinking about it, Chris. This is like one of my, I did a painting in Estes. It was wax, so I don't really include that. But this one is not bad. And this is one of my first abstract creations. Yeah, so this was for that show in 1980, which was in October. A month later, I go and paint the break train. So this predates break. But after I did this, I said to myself, if I can paint a 4x8 piece of wood in about half an hour, I could probably paint a train in about 3 or 4 hours. I actually worked up the scale and the math, and I was like, yeah, I could do that. And the break train only took me, if it took 5 hours, I think I'm lying. I'm pretty sure I got it done in less than 4. So it is remarkable to think of what we did back then, whether we did it collectively or individually. We were breaking the law, but with stolen paint. But just to say, it's kind of remarkable. And I tried to pay the MTA to wrap a train, and they wanted $50K. So, nah.
But you know what? Now that you mention this is what I find really quite amazing, right? If I'm looking at the break train and I'm looking at the painting, what a leap of faith and style from this, like totally,
no,
like
sure,
out the block. It's how did that happen?
But I felt like I was even just by bringing out masking tape, I was cheating, right? Like before there was maybe Black Lorat or some stencilist in Europe, because the only stencils out here was like Post-No Bills. But I was using tape. I brought tape to the yard. I used tape on the break train, and I masked off the corporate numbering and, all the messaging and shit. But yeah, I think it was a leap of imagination once again. I was pretty much determined to, because, we had everybody making whole cars now. I mean, Lee, Dondi, Scene, Crash Days, Knock, everyone was engaging in this new scale and dimension. And this was, for me, I've said it before, it was like my opus, actually. It's like my graduation thesis project for this whole movement, and like my goodbye letter. But also could serve as my introduction to what the next chapter was going to be if people were talking about galleries or art, in a sense that it wasn't criminal art, as they would call that.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue into this, John, with your involvement with Fashion Moda, where it seemed like, I guess to me, it was the first time there was a gallery in the South Bronx, right? Stephen Hines and company, this all of a sudden popped up, and we're like, oh, wow, so we have like this art clubhouse now, and you put on the show, and it was really exciting because there was a lot of people that took part in it. By the way, I took part in this when you hung my painting in the back. I never forget that, but
Because he was late.
But here's the thing, and again, kudos to you for this, because what I don't think anyone realized was how important it was to you to advocate for artists and continue to advocate for artists these days. Tell us a little bit about Fashion. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Tell us a bit about Fashion Moda and how did you connect with Stefan and say this was the right move?
Well, that was John's brother, Charlie. He was writing a script for a movie called Wild Style. So I met up with him, and we met a couple of times, and started writing the story, sort of about my life. So he wanted me to meet him in front of Fashion Moda, and I'm like, "What's that?" He goes, "Well, it's a space that they opened up, and it's on 3rd Avenue." So the only reason why I knew the area was because there was a great sneaker shop right next door. So I knew where the shop was, so I went over to meet with him, and we went driving around with Fat Five Freddy. That's when I met him for the first time. And we were looking at areas to film the movie. So that's how I came to know about Fashion Moda. But then I became involved with them because Charlie's wife, Jane Dixon, built a maze, a human maze.
I have images of that. But you know what? Here we are.
There it is. Yeah. So the one on the top left is the one that she built out of cardboard. So she wanted me to paint the cardboard. So I said, okay. But at the time, Knock 167 was living with me. So I said, hey, Knock, let's go paint at this place. And we went, and he helped me paint. And that was like my introduction to Fashion Moda. So while doing this, Stefan Hines and Joe Lewis both came to me and said, hey, why don't you do a show here? So I said, okay, why not? But then I started thinking, like, I don't want to do a show for, by myself. I want to do something with a group of artists. So that's how that came about. And the show opened that fall.
And it's really interesting because at that time, again, there was very, I guess, for many of us, the idea of kind of formally showing or painting on canvas, for that matter, because I think Sam Esses was kind of one of the first jump-offs for many of us. Before that, I remember going up to Noga a lot, a Nation of Graffiti art, which used to be on the west side in your neighborhood, went uptown. Yeah, and I used to see graffiti on canvas, and it looked beautiful, but I thought, no, it belongs on trains. But if I go back, there's something else too on Fashion Moda which I should point out, because it also gave room for you to do a one-man show there. And I found the flyer, what was that, 1985? No, before that, right? So as a young artist, having a show there, right? Like, what clicked in that for you? Was this kind of like, oh, I'm going to aspire to have a kind of formal show? Did it feel informal? Like, were you like, oh, this is legitimate?
Well, I mean, one of the cool things about Fashion Moda in general was it allowed you to kind of conduct this level of experimentation. And I'm saying that because there really was no commercial benefits out of showing there in terms of selling work. So when you kind of are freed from those restraints, you're able to really exercise your imagination maybe a little bit more. So I had the opportunity to do an exhibition there, and really putting a show together. It was kind of my first jump off into that area, and I didn't yet realize that putting a solo exhibition is a big statement within itself. It's not just a matter of having enough work to fill the space, but having work that creates a dialogue somehow. So I did the show, and Fashion Moda was a type of place, like the people in the neighborhood really didn't know what to think of it, Like heads would just pop in, and they were wondering if it was a weed spot, or they were selling clothes here, or Fashion Moda, it must be clothes, or whatever. But, Stefan Hines and Joe Lewis and William Scott, they were always really inviting to the neighborhood and involved people from the neighborhood with Fashion Moda. Yeah. So, those people were like invited to come inside and create this kind of conversation, and through that conversation be like, oh, well, I do art too, you know, and a lot of people in the neighborhood were kind of discovered that way. Oh, you do art? Well, bring your art by and let us take a look at it. This could be a place for you too.
Yeah, Lenny, you provided me with an image that surprised me. Because if you look at this pink image and you look at the lineup, Donald Batchelor, Crash, Futura, Joseph Kosuth, Klaus Oldenburg, Tom Otterness, man, you know, I mean, that's just so crazy to me to think that all of you were, I had no idea this even existed.
Okay, sorry. Shout out to Tom Otterness. Okay, we're all here in New York. I'm sure we've all been in like the 14th Street station. The little kind of copper statues that adorn like 8th Avenue, right? It's like that whole strip. That's Tom's work. But yeah, I mean, even I see that and I'm like, oh wow, that's so long ago. But to be honest, we talk about fashion moda, you know, and we all sound super naive, right, about how it was for us, because there was no sales, no doubt. It was a little bit kooky because Stefan was the first kind of European that we really had met, right? And we weren't yet cultured to that degree. So whether he was Austrian, French, German, etc., it didn't matter. He was like a kook. And it was also like mad, what's the word called? Not just pop-up or like an alternative, right? That was the word back in the, before pop-up landed, we used to call all these things like alternative spaces, right? And I think Fashion Moda was the epitome of that, and there was nothing more alternative at the moment than Fashion Moda. But that show, not for nothing, led to our inclusion in the Diego Cortez show, which followed at PS1, New York New Wave, and the whole crew of us kind of got pushed in on that, and of course the main star of that show would have been Jean-Michel, but we were all there prior to really like 81 when you're talking about scouting for Wild Style, which I did also. And I don't know if you guys even know this, but the club that you guys were part of in the movie Wild Style.
The Dixie.
The Dixie. No, not the nightclub or the venue. Your little graffiti crew. What was that called? The Union? The Union, okay. So the Union had their hangout in a abandoned building in the Bronx where trains rolling right by the fire escape or whatever. That was my building, okay? That was a building that I turned Charlie on to because previously I was location scouting for The Clash, and I took them up, because I used to come up there and you could just like buy a bum like a hero or get them a little bottle and you'd be straight and you'd be their boy. And then you come back a week later, yo, what's up? You know, you keep hooking people up. I'm going to the roof or the 4th floor, you know, and the building's completely gutted. You know, it was sad days up there, not for nothing. That was like a tragedy. But that's subsequent to Martin Luther King getting shot in 68. You know, the whole shit started burning right, like later that night.
Yeah.
And it didn't stop till Reagan came in and was like, burn it, let it burn. Like,
well, what's interesting on that point of Reagan, and I want you to jump in on this, because remember, I forget the name of the artist. You see below here. And
yeah, John Fechner.
John Fechner, right? The famous,
killed it.
The famous picture with Reagan showing up there. But again, one of the earliest sort of pre-street art, so to speak. And I remember there was some very interesting artists that were taking part of activities around the Bronx through Fashion Moda that could be called street art.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few, but he hit it on the head. His was very simple. He would go and whitewash a wall and just, boom, stencil it. And it was in reaction to Jimmy Carter's non-action of the work that he promised to do in the South Bronx.
Broken Promises?
Yeah, Broken Promises.
Broken Promises.
Yeah. Promesas, how you say, Juanita? Rompida. Yeah. So he did these. And so knowing that Ronald Reagan was going to speak in this place, he did these, and it was just like all over the place. all over the
It's
place.
very provocative. As we move forward, again, you provided these images for me, and when I look at them, I'm like, oh my God, these are young kids living life. And so, Lenny, why did you give me these images? There's a reason you gave me these images.
Well, you know, I mean, it's more like Young Money, right? Like, check us out. We're like, you know, we're doing this in some nightclub, like Danceteria. Like, I don't even know where these shots were taken, but. Okay, you do. Yeah.
Okay, so that was at the New York Ethical Society.
Wow.
And there was,
Okay.
I don't know, go figure. But there was this kind of panel that different people were on. I think we were on it for a minute, but there was a huge collaborative paint canvas that was happening.
Oh, yeah.
And people, Keith Haring was, you know, doing figures, and Kenny Scharf did one of his characters. We probably tagged on it as well. It was, you know, kind of caught up in the hysteria of the moment. And that's where that photo, Tom Warren kind of took that photo.
You're talking about the black and white, you,
Yes.
me, and Pink.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I couldn't call it, but I mean, being that we were going to be together, MARE, right? You know, it's like DAZE is invited to this, Johnny's going to be with us, so just sharing photos of myself with these guys. But yeah, I mean, that was a moment also when I could say this is after Wild Style now, or maybe even after, I don't know if Subway Art's been published yet, but you know, like, this is young 80s, us finally having our moment.
Yeah, you guys were becoming a sensation, and there was a select few of you that were really pushing everything forward for us.
Well, it's also, you know, individuals like, and I think we would all agree, like Yaki Kornblit, you know, individuals from Europe who came to our aid. And, you know, a lot of people don't even understand that, you know, we had a falling off moment, because I would say by the mid-'80s, whatever success any of us up here were having, and yeah, MARE was in that graffiti art success show, but MARE was also like, Carlos, were you like 14, 15? Yes. Okay, yes. So you're already like breaking real ground, just...
My voice still cracked.
So was Pink. I mean, Pink needed a chaperone. She was underage, but... Just to say that was an incredible moment for us, and it was just about to blow up. Thanks to the European, you know, I made a statement the other day about how we got thrown a lifeline, you know, and maybe in the same way I would associate it with black musicians of our century, or previous one, who kind of had to go through some hoops and, you know, jump through some various obstacles in order to finally come back around into some recognition, at least back home.
What was that recognition you were getting, though? Was it kind of the novelty of being a street kid painter? Were people saying to you that you were legitimate artists? Were you guys getting legitimacy from abroad more so than you were here?
I mean, I would feel, right? I mean, they actually called us artists. They referred to us as creative individual. You know, we weren't like fashion kids, knuckleheads, you know, whatever the case may be. They actually showed us respect for the first time.
Yeah, I think that a lot of what he's saying is really like jazz musicians, and kind of goes back to what they were experiencing. You know, I think that the European perspective of artists was different, because they were kind of, the average person is, whether they're from Italy or France or whatever, they're growing up with art. They're growing up with this kind of culture. So they look at artists as somebody that's contributing to society. Rather than in America, art is usually used to sell something or somehow. Oh, okay, you're an artist. Like, it's like a commercial application. So it's different. I mean, when, you know, it's like, you know, their understanding of us was really different. And, you know, in the mid to late 80s, I felt really lucky to have some kind of support from Europe.
Yeah, The Europe thing was phenomenal because from day one, it was never about these kids from the streets.
Give us an idea what day one was. What year?
Oh, what's this, 83? Yaki Complete, 82, 83? Yeah, right around there. So we're talking about right from the jump, when they became aware of us, and he was the first one that actually came, and not just to show, but he actually supported because he bought from everyone, 10 paintings, 12 paintings, and we had the thing where he wired the money to a bank on 57th Street, and then we'd go to the bank, and they would release the money to us. It was an interesting dynamic, but Yaki Complete was probably one of the first, but because of him, immediately, museums like the Stadelijk and the Boymans bought paintings, but then, not only that, but then he had friends who were massive dealers like Raymond Thomas and others who were blue chip dealers who jumped on, and they invited us to Germany to spend one summer to paint. He bought the entire lot out, and on and on. So that continued. And then 88 came, 1988, 89, and it just like stopped.
Right, but also just there's some important things to point out while Yaki, and perhaps you can give me dates on this, you guys, because yes, the Europeans had special interests, but notably two very important American gallerists took special interests, Leo Castelli and Sidney Janis. And when you did the show with Sidney Janis on 57th Street, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that came about through
was that after Yaki?
About the same time, because it was 83. Dolores Newman, who was married to Hubert Newman, whose family had a massive art collection, she immediately embraced us. And she would show our paintings to different people. So like the Rubels became collectors of our work. So many people, but then she was friendly with Carol Janis, who was the son of Sidney Janis, and that conversation happened, and they decided to do a show in the winter of '83, and it was ourselves, John Michel, Keith, Kenny, Ram. So Toxic, Knox. We were all involved in this exhibition, and that sort of like was the icebreaker here.
Can you give us an example of what artists he was showing at that time?
In '83, Tom Wesselman, oh my goodness.
George Siegel.
George Siegel, but he was also known for the modernists.
Giacometti.
Yeah, so the modernist was his big thing. So the Italian futurists, this is what he was representing. But he was also a catalyst for new things that were very abrupt, that was in your face. That was Sidney. So that was his thing. And there was, abstract expressionism was the best, where example of that. And he represented them. He was their dealer for a long time. Then pop art came along, and he, so that was Sidney. So we came along, and it was in the same playing field that he liked to play in.
So it's interesting that they would find themselves in this arena, right, where painting, the tradition of painting, seemed, well, reserved for a few, and in both in practice and education, actually. And it's interesting because some of the names you've mentioned, these are really highly well-known painters and stuff like that, right? And so here comes some kids with spray paint and attitude, and which leads me into the next part of this conversation, right? Which is the spray can as the new brush.